Daniel had always felt like he did not belong. From his earliest school days, he had been quiet, shy, and careful with his words. He was never the one to join in the loud conversations or make jokes with his classmates. Instead, he preferred to keep his head down, focus on his studies, and retreat into his own world. Unfortunately, his quiet nature made him an easy target for bullies. One classmate in particular, Alex, made it his personal mission to make Daniel's life miserable. Every day brought a new insult, a cruel prank, or a joke at Daniel's expense. Daniel tried to ignore it, but deep down, each taunt left a mark. After school, Daniel's life did not get any easier. He had dreams of pursuing something meaningful, but life had other plans. He became a single dad unexpectedly in his early 20s. The news of having a child brought both fear and hope. Fear because he had no experience, no steady income, and no plan. Hope because he felt a deep love for the tiny life he was now responsible for. He worked multiple jobs, never complaining, always putting his child first. There were nights when he came home exhausted. Yet the smile on his child's face gave him the strength to keep going. He may have been an outsider in school, but at home he was a hero. 10 years passed. The memories of high school still lingered, but they had softened. Daniel had learned to let go of the anger he once carried. Life had taught him lessons he never thought he would learn. Patience, resilience, and the quiet power of perseverance. He had built a modest life, and though it was not perfect, it was his. He had stable work, a small home, and a close circle of friends who respected him. And most importantly, his child was happy and thriving. One day, out of the blue, Daniel received an invitation in the mail. It was from Alex. The handwriting was familiar, and the words were polite on the surface. Alex was hosting a reunion for their old classmates, and he was inviting Daniel. At first, Daniel felt a pang of old fear. Memories of taunts, jokes, and ridicule came rushing back. He stared at the invitation for a long time, unsure if he wanted to face those people again. He thought of the embarrassment, the uncomfortable questions, the laughter he could almost hear in his mind. Daniel shared the invitation with a close friend, someone who knew his story, his struggles, and his triumphs. His friend listened quietly, then said something that stuck with him. "You don't have to go to prove anything to Alex, but if you go, it's for yourself. You get to show that your life did not stop, that you grew stronger, and that you survived." That simple statement shifted something in Daniel. He realized he had spent too long hiding from his past, letting the fear of what others thought dictate his choices. Maybe it was time to face it, not with anger, but with confidence. The days leading up to the reunion were filled with a strange mix of anticipation and anxiety. Daniel prepared carefully. He wanted to present himself well, not to boast, but to reflect the life he had built. He polished his clothes, made sure his hair was neat, and even gave extra attention to the small things that often went unnoticed. His child helped in small ways, holding the shoes, straightening the tie, and offering encouragement. Their innocent excitement made Daniel smile and eased his nerves. When the day arrived, Daniel drove toward the venue with a calm determination. He was nervous, yes, but there was also a sense of pride in his heart. He thought about the years of struggle, the nights he had stayed up worrying about bills, the times he had gone without so his child could have what they needed. Every challenge he had faced had led to this moment, and he wanted to step into it with dignity. As he approached the reunion, Daniel noticed the familiar building where they had all agreed to meet. Some cars were parked outside, a few groups of people chatting, laughing, and catching up. He could hear bits of conversation as he walked closer, old inside jokes and memories floating in the air. And then he saw him, Alex. He was standing near the entrance, smiling, extending his hand to greet people, clearly enjoying the attention. Daniel's heart tightened for a moment, but he focused on his breathing and stepped forward, determined to remain composed. When Daniel entered the venue, the room seemed to go silent for a brief moment. Some of the classmates recognized him immediately, while others whispered among themselves, trying to recall who he was. Daniel felt the eyes on him, some curious, some skeptical, and some carrying the faint echo of old judgments. He held his head high, a calm smile on his face, and made his way toward a spot where he could stand comfortably. He didn't rush, didn't look flustered, and certainly didn't appear intimidated. Alex's smile faltered slightly when he saw Daniel. He had expected a timid, unsure figure, someone who would shrink in front of the group just as he had imagined years ago. But Daniel's posture, his expression, and the quiet confidence in his movements told a different story. Alex's mind raced. trying to figure out how this man who once seemed so vulnerable had changed so much. A flicker of unease crossed his face, but he quickly masked it with a forced laugh. The reunion continued, with classmates sharing stories from their school days. Laughter filled the room as people recalled funny incidents, embarrassing moments, and adventures they had shared. Alex tried to insert a few jokes about Daniel, expecting the group to laugh along. But something was different. Daniel's calm presence seemed to absorb the humor, redirecting it in a way that no one could mock him. The classmates noticed the change, and some began to hesitate, unsure whether it was appropriate to join Alex in his attempt to humiliate. Daniel did not respond with anger or sarcasm. He simply smiled politely and listened. When a classmate tried to mention an old incident where Daniel had been ridiculed, he acknowledged it with grace, even finding humor in the situation. This quiet strength caught everyone off guard. People who had once dismissed him began to see a side of Daniel they had never noticed before, a person who had endured hardship, faced challenges, and emerged stronger without bitterness. As the evening progressed, Daniel's child wandered around, greeting people with a friendly smile and sharing innocent stories. The classmates were charmed, and even Alex found himself momentarily distracted by the child's presence. Daniel watched with quiet pride, realizing that the person he had become was intertwined with the life he had built for his child. The years of struggle, sacrifice, and perseverance had culminated in this moment, where his strength and resilience were visible not just in his words, but in his very demeanor. By the end of the first part of the evening, it was clear that Daniel's presence had shifted the room's energy. The old power dynamics no longer applied. He had entered as an outsider, as someone expected to be mocked, but now he stood as a testament to quiet perseverance. Alex, who had once held the power in the group, was now faced with the uncomfortable reality that his past cruelty could not define someone's future. Daniel's life had moved forward, and in doing so, he had changed the narrative entirely. The air outside the venue was crisp, and the sun was beginning to dip low, casting warm golden light across the parking lot. Daniel adjusted his jacket and looked at the car parked at the entrance. It was a Rolls Royce, polished and gleaming in the evening light, a sharp contrast to the modest vehicles of some of his old classmates. His child's small hand held his tightly, their excitement evident in the skip of each step. This was more than a car. It was a quiet symbol of the life Daniel had built, a life that had taken years of hard work, sleepless nights, and determination. As Daniel opened the door and stepped out, heads began to turn. Some classmates paused mid-conversation, eyes widening slightly in disbelief. Others whispered among themselves, trying to piece together who this man was and how he had arrived in such a grand way. There was a sense of shock in the air, a momentary pause where all attention shifted toward Daniel. He smiled gently at a few familiar faces and walked steadily toward the entrance, projecting calm and quiet confidence. Alex was the first to notice. His earlier plan to mock Daniel seemed suddenly flimsy. He had imagined Daniel walking in timid, unsure, perhaps even embarrassed. Instead, Daniel approached with purpose. Alex's smile faltered for a moment, replaced by a flicker of unease. He cleared his throat and moved to greet Daniel, trying to mask the sudden tension with a cheerful but forced handshake. "Daniel, wow, it's been a long time," Alex said, his voice a little too high-pitched, his eyes scanning Daniel from head to toe, assessing, comparing. Daniel nodded politely. "It has been. Thank you for the invitation, Alex." There was no anger, no hesitation, just a steady, calm tone that caught Alex off guard. His usual confidence, the smug superiority he had relied on for years, seemed to waver slightly. Inside, the reunion was in full swing. Tables of food lined the room, and groups of classmates mingled, laughing and sharing stories from the past. Daniel walked slowly, scanning the room and greeting those who came toward him. Some remembered him immediately. Others whispered, trying to recall his identity. Whispers traveled through the crowd, curiosity growing with each passing moment. Alex, noticing the attention Daniel was drawing, tried to regain control. He launched into an old story, a moment meant to embarrass Daniel, to remind everyone of his so-called past failures. "Remember the time Daniel fell off the stage during the talent show?" he said with a laugh, looking around for the expected chorus of chuckles. But instead of the laughter he anticipated, there was silence. People looked at Daniel, observing him, waiting to see his reaction. Daniel smiled, not mockingly, but with understanding. "Yes, I do remember that night," he said calmly. "I was nervous, but it was a learning experience. I realized that trying and failing isn't the end of the world." His voice carried a subtle warmth that drew people in, his honesty making the room feel different. The classmates who had once laughed at him now found themselves considering his words thoughtfully. A few murmurs of agreement spread quietly through the crowd. Alex's face flushed slightly. He tried to continue, hoping to regain the laughter, but the energy had shifted. Daniel was no longer the timid boy he had known in school. He was someone who had endured, grown, and faced life's challenges with strength. Alex glanced around nervously, noticing that some classmates were now talking to Daniel more than him, laughing at his genuine humor, listening to his observations, and engaging with his quiet confidence. Daniel's child wandered ahead slightly, greeting classmates with a friendly smile and bright eyes. The child's innocence and energy added another layer to the surprise. People commented on how happy and well-behaved the child was, and a few whispered about Daniel's role as a devoted parent. It became clear to everyone in the room that Daniel's life had evolved into something admirable. His success was not loud or boastful, but it was evident in the way he carried himself, in the way he engaged with others, and in the respect that his child naturally commanded. Alex, struggling to regain the center of attention, tried another approach. He began asking Daniel about his work and life over the past decade, hoping to frame it in a way that might highlight shortcomings. But Daniel answered each question with honesty and composure, sharing challenges and successes with humility. He spoke of long hours, hard decisions, and the importance of perseverance. His words resonated with people in the room. Some were inspired, some were quietly impressed. Alex's attempts to mock were now overshadowed by genuine admiration from their peers. As the evening progressed, Daniel noticed a few classmates approaching him cautiously, curious to know more about the journey that had transformed the quiet boy they once knew into the composed man before them. They asked about his work, the moves he had made to build stability for himself and his child, and the lessons he had learned along the way. Daniel answered openly, never boasting but simply sharing his experiences. The room's energy shifted entirely, from anticipation of humiliation to genuine interest and respect. During a quieter moment, Daniel stepped aside with a close friend from school who had been kind to him in the past. They exchanged a few private words, laughing about old memories, and Daniel allowed himself a small, satisfied smile. This was not about revenge or proving Alex wrong. It was about showing the life he had built through patience and hard work. He realized that the true victory was in being at peace with himself and the life he had created for his child. Alex tried one more time to regain control. Nudging a few classmates with comments meant to draw attention back to Daniel's past. But it didn't work. The classmates, now seeing Daniel's composed confidence and respectful interactions, were less inclined to follow Alex's lead. A subtle respect had replaced the old laughter. Whispers now carried words of admiration rather than mockery. Alex could feel the shift, and a hint of embarrassment crossed his face. His past power over Daniel had evaporated, replaced by something he could not easily challenge. Daniel's arrival, his composed demeanor, and his life's quiet proof of success created a ripple effect throughout the reunion. People began to reflect on their own paths, recognizing that life could take unexpected turns and that the person who had once seemed weak might emerge stronger and more admirable. Daniel moved through the room with grace, greeting everyone, engaging in small conversations and allowing his child to interact with classmates freely. His presence, calm and dignified, left a lasting impression. By the end of Part 2, the scene was set for a deeper exploration of the tension and dynamics in the room. Daniel had arrived in a manner that caught everyone by surprise, including Alex, whose confidence was being challenged in a quiet, powerful way. The classmates were no longer simply remembering the past. They were witnessing the present strength and character of someone who had once been underestimated. Daniel had shown that success was not about vengeance or loud displays, but about perseverance, dignity, and quiet pride in the life he had built. As the evening continued, the room's atmosphere grew more complex. Conversations had shifted from playful memories to careful observation of Daniel. His presence seemed to pull people in naturally. Classmates who had once seen him as timid and awkward now noticed his calm composure, the confidence in his posture, and the warmth in his interactions. Even the small gestures he made, like listening attentively, smiling politely, and acknowledging others' stories, created a quiet authority that could not be ignored. Alex, who had been the center of attention for years, now found himself uncomfortable. He tried several times to regain the group's focus, cracking jokes and reminding people of old incidents that once humiliated Daniel. But each attempt fell flat. Daniel's responses were simple yet effective. He acknowledged the stories, sometimes laughing at his own past awkwardness, sometimes pointing out a lesson he had learned from each experience. There was no bitterness in his tone, no trace of resentment. This calm acceptance made it impossible for anyone to mock him. Instead, it drew admiration from his peers. People began to quietly compare what had changed in their lives over the past 10 years. Some had achieved professional success, some were raising families, and others had simply survived struggles. But Daniel's journey stood out because of its quiet resilience. His life had been difficult, yet he had built stability, earned respect, and maintained his dignity. The realization slowly dawned on the group that the boy they once mocked had turned those struggles into strength. Daniel's child added an unexpected layer to the evening. The child moved through the room with a curious and open attitude, speaking politely, engaging with classmates, and asking questions. This innocence highlighted Daniel's role not just as a provider, but as a loving parent who had nurtured confidence and kindness. The classmates, seeing the interaction, were struck by the contrast to their expectations. It was clear that Daniel's life was about more than material success. It was about values, responsibility, and love. Alex's frustration grew. He had imagined a scene where he could assert superiority, dominate the conversation, and elicit laughter at Daniel's expense. Instead, he found himself overshadowed. Every comment he made to regain control of the room was met with polite nods or gentle deflection. He noticed that the classmates were drawn more to Daniel's humility, his genuine stories, and the subtle humor that came naturally in conversation. Alex felt a growing discomfort, a recognition that his past cruelty could not define someone else's present or future. Daniel moved through the room with quiet ease, greeting people who approached him and engaging in genuine conversations. He asked questions about their lives, listened with interest, and offered encouragement. His approach was simple yet powerful. By focusing on connection rather than confrontation, he transformed the atmosphere from one of tension to one of respect and curiosity. People who had been wary of awkward interactions now relaxed, finding that Daniel's presence was reassuring rather than threatening. At one point, a classmate who had been a quiet observer approached Daniel. They began talking about the difficulties of early adulthood, work, and parenthood. Daniel shared candidly, recounting challenges he had faced as a single parent, the sacrifices he had made, and the lessons he had learned. There was no need to boast. The weight of his experiences was evident in his demeanor and his calm, thoughtful speech. The classmate listened intently, clearly impressed by Daniel's perseverance and wisdom. This small interaction rippled through the room, as others noticed and started to engage with Daniel in similar ways, eager to hear his story. As the evening progressed, Daniel noticed Alex attempting to dominate a conversation near the back of the room. He approached calmly, greeting a few classmates along the way. When he reached the group, he joined the discussion naturally, offering insights and sharing anecdotes from his life. Without confrontation, Daniel's contributions shifted attention from Alex. The classmates responded warmly, laughing at his stories, asking questions, and nodding in agreement. Alex's smile faltered, replaced by a subtle tension he could not hide. Daniel's presence also encouraged other classmates to reflect on their own growth. Some shared personal struggles they had overcome, inspired by Daniel's example. Others realized how much time had passed and how their perspectives had changed since high school. The room transformed from a space of nostalgia and potential ridicule into a place of reflection and acknowledgement of personal journeys. Daniel had unintentionally created an environment where people could appreciate not only his growth, but their own. Throughout the evening, Daniel maintained a sense of calm and balance. He did not dominate conversation aggressively, nor did he seek attention. Instead, he allowed his actions, words, and demeanor to speak for themselves. He showed respect to everyone he interacted with, acknowledging their achievements, asking sincere questions, and offering encouragement. This approach contrasted sharply with Alex's attempts at humor and dominance, making it clear who had truly grown over the years. By the middle of the evening, Alex's attempts to regain control were increasingly ineffective. The classmates had shifted their focus, drawn to Daniel's humility, confidence, and authenticity. Alex noticed the whispers, the laughter directed toward Daniel, and the genuine interest in his stories. The power dynamics had shifted completely, and he could not deny it. The boy he once mocked had become a man who commanded respect effortlessly. Daniel's child continued to move around, engaging with classmates and showing a natural curiosity. Daniel watched with quiet pride, understanding that his role as a parent had contributed to this transformation. The child's behavior reflected the values Daniel had instilled: kindness, confidence, and respect. Classmates noticed the bond, and it further emphasized the depth of Daniel's growth. This was not simply about material success. It was about character, integrity, and love. As part 3 of the evening unfolded, Daniel's impact on the reunion became increasingly evident. He had entered a room where he expected potential ridicule, yet he had transformed it into a space of respect and admiration. His presence, calm demeanor, and genuine interactions left a lasting impression on everyone present. People began to see that true success and growth are measured not by wealth or status alone, but by resilience, character, and the ability to navigate life's challenges with dignity. By the end of the night, Daniel had quietly but effectively shifted the room's energy. The classmates who once laughed at him now saw him as a figure of perseverance and integrity. Alex, faced with the reality of Daniel's transformation, began to understand that the past could no longer be used as a tool for ridicule. Daniel had arrived not just as a participant in a reunion, but as a living example of growth, strength, and the quiet power of resilience. The stage was now set for the final revelations, where the true measure of Daniel's journey and the impact of his presence would become even more apparent. As the night deepened, the room seemed to settle into a more reflective mood. The laughter and casual chatter from earlier had faded into a quieter hum of conversation, and the focus shifted more toward meaningful stories. Daniel found himself at the center, not because he demanded it, but because people were naturally drawn to the authenticity in his presence. His calm, composed demeanor encouraged others to open up, and soon, several classmates were sharing personal experiences and challenges they had faced over the past decade. Daniel listened carefully to each story, responding with empathy and occasional encouragement. He asked thoughtful questions, not to show off knowledge or success, but to genuinely understand their experiences. His ability to engage with others without judgment, combined with the calm confidence he exuded, created a sense of warmth in the room. People began to appreciate his journey, realizing that the quiet, shy boy from their school days had transformed into a man of resilience and integrity. Alex tried once more to regain control of the room. He attempted to tell a humorous story about Daniel's awkward school moments, expecting laughter to follow. But this time his words seemed flat. Daniel responded with a soft chuckle and a brief acknowledgement, turning the moment into a reflection on growth rather than ridicule. "I was nervous back then," Daniel said, "but those experiences taught me to be more confident and patient. It wasn't easy, but I learned that life isn't about avoiding failure. It's about learning from it." His words were simple, yet they carried a profound truth that resonated with many of the classmates. The atmosphere in the room shifted noticeably. People who had been entertained by Alex's jokes now found themselves quietly reflecting on Daniel's perspective. His humility, honesty, and self-assuredness created a new energy in the room, one of admiration and respect rather than mockery. Daniel's presence had changed the dynamic completely. He had not raised his voice, demanded attention, or sought revenge. Instead, he had let his character and life's work speak for itself. As the evening progressed, Daniel shared more about his life as a single parent. He spoke openly about the struggles and sacrifices, the long nights working multiple jobs, the challenges of raising a child alone, and the moments of doubt that had tested his resilience. His stories were raw and genuine, and classmates listened intently, many of them visibly moved. They began to see the person he had become, not the timid, quiet boy from school, but a man who had faced adversity with courage and dignity. Daniel's child played nearby, occasionally chiming in with innocent observations and questions. The child's natural charm and politeness reflected the upbringing Daniel had provided, highlighting his dedication and care as a parent. Classmates who had been skeptical at first could not help but notice how well-adjusted and confident the child was, a living testament to Daniel's values and guidance. It became clear that his success was not just about material wealth or status. It was about character, love, and responsibility. Alex's frustration grew with each passing moment. The power he had once held over Daniel and the room was slipping away. Every attempt to redirect attention back to himself or to belittle Daniel fell flat. The classmates, now aware of the transformation in Daniel, were no longer willing to indulge Alex's old patterns of mockery. Instead, they engaged with Daniel's stories, asked questions, and expressed admiration for the life he had built. Alex could feel the shift in energy, and a sense of unease settled over him. At one point, Daniel addressed the group more directly, sharing the lessons he had learned from life's challenges. He spoke about resilience, patience, and the importance of self-respect. His words were simple and relatable, resonating with people from different backgrounds and experiences. He did not speak to shame anyone or assert superiority. He spoke to inspire and to offer perspective. Classmates who had once doubted him now nodded in agreement, silently acknowledging the growth and wisdom he had gained. The room's energy continued to evolve. Conversations that had been tense or competitive earlier were now collaborative and reflective. People were sharing their own experiences, seeking advice, and offering support to one another. Daniel's presence had not only elevated his own story, but had also encouraged others to reflect on their lives, choices, and growth over the past 10 years. The reunion had transformed from a potential scene of embarrassment into a meaningful gathering of shared experiences and mutual respect. Alex, realizing that he could no longer dominate the room, began to withdraw slightly. His attempts to inject humor or criticism were met with polite acknowledgement or gentle deflection. The classmates who had once laughed at Daniel now looked to him for insight, guidance, and perspective. Alex's past power over the group had been quietly dismantled, not through confrontation or retaliation, but through Daniel's calm confidence and integrity. As the evening drew to a close, Daniel's impact on the reunion became increasingly clear. He had arrived as an outsider, potentially vulnerable to ridicule, yet he had transformed the room with his presence, stories, and demeanor. People were no longer focused on past mistakes or awkward moments. They were focused on the person Daniel had become and the life he had built. His success was evident not in wealth or status alone, but in the respect, admiration, and genuine interest he had inspired among his peers. Daniel took a moment to speak quietly with a few classmates who had been kind to him in the past, sharing gratitude for their support and reflecting on their shared experiences. These intimate conversations reinforced the theme of growth, resilience, and mutual respect that had emerged throughout the evening. The classmates, seeing Daniel's humility and grace, began to understand that true strength lies not in mockery or dominance, but in perseverance, empathy, and self-assurance. By the end of Part 4, it was evident that Daniel had not only faced his past but had risen above it. He had navigated the reunion with dignity, turned potential humiliation into an opportunity for reflection and connection, and demonstrated the power of resilience and personal growth. The classmates, once entertained by old memories of ridicule, were now inspired by the life Daniel had built. Alex, confronted with this reality, could no longer rely on past power to assert dominance. Daniel's journey, patience, and quiet confidence had reshaped the narrative, leaving a lasting impression on everyone present. The stage was set for the final moments, where the full impact of his presence and the lessons of the evening would become unmistakably clear. As the reunion approached its end, the room was filled with a sense of quiet reflection. The laughter that had marked the beginning of the evening had given way to thoughtful conversations and shared stories. Daniel stood near the center of the room, observing the interactions with a calm satisfaction. He had entered the evening uncertain, carrying the weight of old memories and past insecurities, but now he realized how much had changed. His presence had shifted the energy of the entire gathering. Alex, who had once been the confident instigator of ridicule, now lingered awkwardly on the periphery. His attempts to regain the spotlight had failed, and the classmates were no longer paying attention to his jokes or stories. Instead, they gravitated naturally toward Daniel, drawn by his genuine kindness, humility, and the quiet authority in the way he spoke and moved. It was clear that the balance of power had shifted entirely. Daniel's child played nearby, still curious and cheerful, engaging with classmates and sharing stories with the same innocent enthusiasm that had captivated everyone earlier. This interaction highlighted the full picture of Daniel's life, a man who had not only achieved personal and professional growth, but had also nurtured and guided a confident, happy child. The classmates noticed, and whispers of admiration began to spread. Daniel's life was not flashy or boastful. It was grounded, steady, and full of substance. Seeing this, Alex felt a deep discomfort. He realized that his old tactics of mockery could not affect someone who had built such a solid foundation of respect and character. The realization that Daniel's achievements were genuine and hard-earned left him with a sense of unease. It was no longer possible for him to rely on the past to assert dominance. Daniel had become someone who commanded attention and admiration naturally, without ever needing to belittle others. Daniel chose a moment to speak to the group as a whole, not to humiliate anyone, but to share his experiences in a way that was inspiring. He talked about the challenges of single parenthood, the difficulties of managing work and responsibilities, and the lessons he had learned about perseverance and patience. His words were simple but powerful, and they resonated deeply with his classmates. Many nodded in agreement, others smiled thoughtfully, and a few even shared quiet words of appreciation. It became clear that Daniel's story had touched everyone in the room. The classmates who had once laughed at his awkwardness were now reflecting on their own journeys. Some spoke of the challenges they had faced, their own failures and successes, and the ways in which they had grown. Daniel listened with genuine interest, offering encouragement and empathy, never interrupting or dominating the conversation. His approach fostered a sense of connection and mutual respect, turning the evening into an exchange of wisdom and shared human experience. As the night drew to a close, Daniel moved through the room one last time, exchanging farewells and expressing gratitude to those who had made the effort to attend. His calm, polite manner left a lasting impression. People who had once dismissed him or laughed at him now looked at him with admiration and respect. It was a complete reversal from the dynamics of their school years, and Daniel did so without needing to boast or seek revenge. His success had spoken for itself. Alex finally approached Daniel, a mixture of awkwardness and acknowledgement on his face. There were no words of mockery, no attempts at dominance. Instead, there was a recognition of what Daniel had accomplished. He extended a hand and Daniel shook it firmly, smiling warmly. In that simple gesture, the past tension dissolved. Alex's face reflected an understanding that some lessons in life are best taught through example rather than confrontation. Daniel's quiet dignity had made the impact. As Daniel and his child walked out of the venue, the evening's events left a lasting mark on everyone who had attended. Classmates were talking among themselves, reflecting on the surprising transformation they had witnessed. Daniel's life, his calm confidence, and the success he had quietly built over the years had become a subtle lesson for the group. They realized that mockery, gossip, and power dynamics of the past could never define the future of someone determined to rise above it. Daniel's child held his hand tightly as they walked to the car, eyes bright with curiosity and excitement from the evening. Daniel felt a quiet pride, not from the material symbols of success, but from the life he had built and the lessons he had modeled for his child. He had faced old fears, confronted past insecurities, and emerged stronger, without compromising his values or kindness. The Rolls Royce gleamed in the light, but it was more than just a car. It was a symbol of the journey Daniel had undertaken. It represented perseverance, dedication, and the quiet triumph of integrity. As they drove away, the memories of old bullying faded further into the past. What remained was a story of growth, resilience, and the undeniable truth that character and hard work speak louder than ridicule ever could. Daniel reflected on the night as he drove, thinking not about revenge but about life and the way challenges shape a person. He knew that he had made a choice to face the past not with anger but with dignity, and that choice had changed everything. The classmates had seen the strength of someone who refused to be defined by their childhood experiences. And in doing so, Daniel had reminded them of the power of perseverance, humility, and respect. By the time they reached home, Daniel felt a sense of calm fulfillment. The reunion had started as a source of anxiety and uncertainty, but it had ended as a confirmation of the life he had built and the principles he lived by. He had not needed to humiliate anyone or prove himself aggressively. His actions, his calm confidence, and the love he had shown for his child had done all the work. He had turned potential embarrassment into a quiet triumph. In the days following the reunion, Daniel noticed subtle changes in how he was perceived by the wider circle of acquaintances who had attended. Messages of admiration, quiet compliments, and reflections on his words began to arrive. People who had once dismissed him now reached out to reconnect or express respect. The ripple effect of the evening was evident, and Daniel realized that his journey had created inspiration, even in small ways, for those around him. Daniel continued his life with the same quiet determination and humility that had guided him through the reunion. The experience had reinforced his belief in resilience, integrity, and the importance of leading by example. He focused on his child, his work, and his values, knowing that the true measure of success lay in the life he built and the character he maintained. The story of the reunion, of facing old fears and emerging stronger, became a personal reminder of the power of patience, self-respect, and perseverance. By the end of Part 5, Daniel had fully reclaimed his narrative. The classmates who had once mocked him now respected him. Alex had confronted the limitations of his past behavior, and Daniel had shown that true success is not about material wealth or status alone, but about integrity, humility, and the strength to rise above adversity. The reunion ended not with drama or revenge, but with dignity, quiet triumph, and the affirmation that a life lived with purpose and resilience speaks louder than any insult ever could. The story of that evening became a lasting testament to the power of perseverance, character, and human spirit.